Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I'm broadcasting today from San Francisco. And really happy to be here today to talk about this whole idea of accountability. We started it last week, and I want to continue a little bit more on this theme. And the reason why I want to talk about this is some recent experiences I've had with people where we were talking about who is this we that we often talk about. We're going to do X, we're going to do Y. I see so many organizations begin with these meetings and with grand visions of the change or transformations they're going to do. And they're asking, what are we going to do? We're going to do this. We are going to do this. And then I really wanted to hear from those leaders, well, what are you going to do? How are we going to do this? What are you going to take on as that responsibility? Because unless we as leaders are going to go and do this, then it's not going to happen very well. So I want to talk a little bit today about these kinds of things. And I encourage you to share, how do you personally demonstrate personal accountability and responsibility? And we'll talk a little bit about what the differences are between accountability and responsibility. But I really want to focus on what we as leaders need to do in order to create a sense of ownership, of accountability in our organizations. So I want to get going with just a little bit of conversation around why this is so hard. And I'll give you an example back to this meeting. I was literally working with this organization. They were a financial institution going through a huge amount of change. And I really asked, as the leaders were sharing their plans, to say what the plans were, what they were going to do, and what they were going to do to personally ensure that this was going to happen. So instead of saying we as a company or we as a department, we're going to do this, say we are going to do this and I will do XYZ. And what was fascinating is how difficult it was for those leaders to actually say I, the word I. And this comes from an ingrained sense that as leaders, it shouldn't be about me, it should be about us. That is true. But also as a leader, when are you going to be accountable? What are you going to be accountable for? What are you going to do as a leader to ensure that these outcomes happen and take responsibility for those tasks and be accountable for the actions and the outcomes that will come out? So it was fascinating to see how difficult it was for these leaders to do that. And it started me thinking about, what is it that's so difficult about us taking on responsibility? And I encourage you again to share your comments, where you're coming from, because I would love to hear how you think about accountability and responsibility as a leader. So let me give you some statistics from Ann Luhr. 93% of employees don't really understand what their organizations are trying to accomplish and how it aligns to their own work. 85% of leaders aren't defining what their people should be working on, and an equal number of employees crave clarity on what it is. 84% of the workforce describes itself as trying but failing or avoiding accountability, even when employees know what to fix. So they know what has to happen in order for things to go the way it should be, but they can't get to that point or just avoid accountability for owning that change. And 80% of people see accountability as punishment, not as a positive force. So I think it's really important for us to think about accountability and responsibility from a new perspective, to say, what are these words? What are we really trying to create? Uh, um, and Sanjay says this, as a leader, I should take ownership if a project fails, but it's rare in practice. And I think that's such a good point, Sanjay. When something fails, it seems like everybody runs away instead of saying, I am responsible for this thing. It's not working. How are we going to make it work? It didn't work out. Maybe there's something we can do to make it fix, or just completely owning and saying it didn't work. So let's talk about what accountability is. Accountability, the Webster Dictionary definition of accountability, is the obligation or willingness to accept responsibility for one's actions. So this has a lot in this. It's responsibility is what you actually do, the tasks that you're going to be responsible for accomplishing. And accountability is a willingness to accept the outcomes of those actions. So the two of these things are very different. And one of the key ways you can tell that this may be missing in your organization, how you can identify that there may be accountability gaps in your organization, is when there are a lot of missed deadlines. People are not doing what they say they're going to do. They're breaking their promises. There are vague expectations of what is supposed to be done. You're constantly hounding people for updates. Like, what's going on? Do you have an update? You said you're going to get something done and you didn't. What's going on? Or you feel the need as a leader to micromanage things because people aren't showing up and being responsible for the actions that they said they would be doing. So if you have those kinds of things going on in your organization, then you probably have an accountability gap and you need to be able to address them. So here are a couple other comments from Knox Keith. Let's see this. Some of this can be cultural in the company, what is acceptable or not in terms of embracing failure, and the consequences of what happens afterwards. This is such a good point, Knox, that in particular, that this could be ingrained in the culture. And cultures, I've often said, are just what you believe and the behaviors that reflect those beliefs. So if you believe that you're not going to be able to accept failure, then you're never going to admit it. If you believe that if you come forward with something that's not working, you'll get punished for it, then you're not going to come forward with it. So culture has a lot to do with this. And what we're going to talk about today is how do you change your culture and create a culture around accountability. This is one person who says, I'm a big fan of KPIs and OKRs, translated down to the tactics at the team and individual level. So KPIs, key performance indexes, and OKRs, objectives and key results. And then have regular check-ins, sometimes a dashboard. Person loves a dashboard. I love dashboards too. With coaching on how we can help each other achieve the desired results. I wish I knew who you were. I am loving this comment. We're going to hear so much of it echoed in some of the recommended actions I'm going to talk about. But I love this whole idea of regular check-ins and the dashboard to create transparency about what the results are, what's actually happening. And then also this coaching of helping each other to say, well, if you didn't get the results, we're going to support each other to get to that point. So much goodness in that comment. Thank you so much. Andrea shares, I believe a good way is to explain the ambition. Yes, the strategy to achieve the ambition and going over with the team, ensuring they understand their contributions to achieving the team goals. OKRs, again, objectives and key results. Approach is a very handy tool to put that into practice. Andrea, I love the fact that you're going through and making sure that everybody understands how each person is going to contribute, their role and responsibility in getting the results. And that creates a team sense of accountability. This isn't just on one person who's accountable for the results. Everybody is. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Oh, some great comments here. Sanjay, according and responsibility goes hand in hand. Leader has to lead and set the example to the larger group instead of we, here's I, and important in creating accountability and comes into picture. So thank you so much, Sanjay, for sharing that. Let's see, we have one other person, making goals specific, aligning tactics. If a goal is ambiguous, it's hard for individuals to take action and know what success and progress looks like. We are going to talk very specifically about setting expectations and what good expectation setting is going to look like. So we're going to come back to that. So, and here, I'm just going to go into, thank you again for all of those comments. And as we go through this, I would love for you to share what you find is resonating with you and also any other ideas or actions that you want to share with a larger group in terms of things that you have found to be very helpful. So, and one last thing from Jay, this is a great point. Distinguishing between goals and objectives. The latter are usually measurable. Absolutely. So objectives and key results, highly measurable, highly clear, very clear whether you achieve them or you're falling short of that goal. So thank you for that, Jay. All right, let's go into this. Let me go into a little bit about what accountability is and what is responsibility very quickly. So accountability is that it's the outcome. Did we achieve what we set out to do? It's ownership of the results. And it's very clear whether those results are attained or not. So to the point of clear objectives, measurable. And this can be individual like one person can be in the end accountable, can also be shared, a sense of shared accountability across the team. Responsibility is very different. These are the actual actions, the tasks that you're going to do. So it's very task oriented, very focused on what the roles are for a person, what the project is going to be about, the tasks that we are going to do. There's an ongoing sense of responsibility. And it's again also knowing that it could be individually shared responsibilities or shared. Now, what's interesting is when things go wrong, when you have a responsibility, you're responsible for letting people know that you're not able to achieve the results that you are accountable for producing. You want to know and let people know that you can't complete the task for whatever reason. And accountability means that you feel so responsible for the results, the outcomes, that you're going to make sure that you problem solve to solve those problems, to make something, when something goes wrong, we're going to fix it. And it could be we as a team, it could be an individual. Again, there's a sense of accountability for the outcomes that when something goes wrong, even though you may not be responsible for it, you may be accountable for making these things happen. So in so many ways, these two things interact with each other. And so we want to make sure that we're creating that sense of accountability and responsibility. So the thing here that we're going to talk about, it's just a couple more comments here, because I think this is really interesting. I'm just looking at here. Luke has a great point. I don't believe it's about pushing accountability down from the top, giving people goals, explaining goals, etc. It's about ensuring this stuff is shared accountability between employees and leaders. Everybody has a responsibility to learn. And to both provide and seek clarity around goals, strategy, and vision. There's a gap in understanding, perceived or otherwise. And I think that is such a good point, Luke. It's that it's a shared accountability and shared responsibility. Everybody has to be aligned. And I would say that if there isn't this, there is a gap, then you as a leader have that responsibility, that accountability to make sure that this becomes a shared responsibility and shared accountability. And that is, I think, the one thing that is really incumbent upon a leader. You can't make everybody accountable. You have to inspire them. You have to create that culture around this, because accountability isn't something that you can demand and command from people. It's something that you have to develop. And we'll talk about doing this. So we'll talk about, first of all, what does it mean to actually model accountability? Because there are three key things that I think are really important. The first one is really around modeling accountability for the team. Because if there's an accountability gap, it probably starts with yourself. Look to yourself and say, are you modeling accountability? Are you showing your team what it means to be responsible? Are you setting down and expectations for what you are going to do, and then holding yourself accountable for this? So write down your commitment, what you are responsible for on the team. What are you going to do? The actions you are going to take to create change and transformation. And frankly, the bigger the change and transformation you're asking the team to make, asking your organization to take, creating accountability in your team to make this change, then the more important it is that you start with yourself and saying, what are you going to change and transform about yourself so that you can model the way for other people? And so share what it is with your team that you are going to change. How are you going to show up differently? How are you going to be responsible? And then encourage everyone to hold you accountable for that. You're creating accountability for yourself, but you're asking your team to also hold you accountable, to support you in making this change possible. So when they see you making this change, ask them to notice that, see how it resonates with them. If they see you not making this change and lapsing into old behavior, ask them to hold you accountable for that, call you on it, and say, look, you said you were going to do this. You're not doing that. So this level of accountability, starting with yourself, is so important because you are modeling the kind of behaviors that you're expecting your team to do. You can't expect your team to be held responsible and accountable for actions that they take and the outcomes that they have if you won't hold yourself accountable and ask them to hold you accountable for these things too. So some actions that you may want to take, making sure that you set clear expectations. Uh, if people are not clear on what they're going to do, they should call you on that. Maybe hold yourself accountable and say, I am going to be responsible for giving you honest and fair feedback as much as I can on where we are, how we are doing. And if you aren't clear about how you are doing things and I'm not being responsible, you can hold me accountable for that. You might hold yourself responsible to making sure that reasonable resources are available, and that in your role is going to be about understanding what everybody's jobs are, setting fair expectations for them, and then making sure they have the resources to do those jobs. And if you're not doing that, then if you're not being responsible for that, then they can hold you accountable for that. So you can see how this has a really interesting dynamic in that when you set expectations for yourself and clearly share them with your team, they will see whether it's working or not. And then in turn, you can go ahead and set the same similar ideas of responsibilities and accountabilities for other people too as well. So I think one of the clear things that it starts doing is by saying that I am going to do this instead of this royal we are going to do this. It starts being very, very specific about what you're going to be responsible for and accountable for. And that specificity is so important to creating this culture of accountability. Let's be absolutely clear what we are trying to achieve. But what am I trying to achieve? What are each individual is trying to achieve? What are we going to be doing? And what is our collective outcome and objective that we're going to achieve? So the first thing, again, is to model accountability for yourself, for your team. Model the way going forward. The second thing is to set clear expectations. And so Jay had mentioned this in one of the comments about using RACI charts. I love RACI charts. They stand for RACI, responsible, who is responsible for something, who is accountable for them, who is going to be consulted, and who is going to be informed. I love this because it provides clarity across an entire project for each individual task. Who is going to do it? Who is going to be accountable for the outcomes, meaning that this was accomplished, and who's going to be consulted along the way. So I may want to check in with different groups and different departments just to make sure we're heading in the right direction, because we want their input into it. And other people just may be informed. They just want to know what the outcomes were. They just want to know what the progress is. So they don't need to be consulted all the time. They may just see things and informed through a dashboard, for example. So having RACI charts are incredibly, incredibly helpful. And it's always been interesting in understanding the responsibility and accountability part. Who's responsible and who's accountable? And those are two very important roles, because who's actually doing the task and who's going to actually sign off that the task has been accomplished, that the outcome has been achieved. So having those two roles clearly defined is a really important role in setting those expectations. And then in particular, if you're setting the accountability, the goals in particular, the objectives, having SMART objectives and goals are really important. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant to your overall objectives, and time bound. There is a time based on this. And speaking of time, it is so, so important to be really specific about times. Again, one of the biggest issues we have is that people are not specific about what time are we going to have this at. Oh, we'll have it next week. Well, what is next week? Well, it's Tuesday. When on Tuesday? Oh, I'll have you tell you by end of day. End of day doesn't count. Your end of day may be different from mine because of time zones. So what time? 5 p.m. Eastern time, or is it 5 p.m. Pacific time? So being really specific about the date, time, and time zone, about when something is going to be done, really goes a long way in being clear about when expectations are going to be set, how they're going to be set. A couple other things I've noticed is that if we don't build this into our everyday lives, into everything that we do, the setting of expectations, who's going to do what, then it starts falling apart. And one of the biggest places we see this falling apart is in meetings. We have meetings, we take notes, we agree on certain action items, and then we go off to the next meeting. It's so important to designate one person as a note taker who says, we're going to capture the decisions and the action items, who is responsible, who's accountable. Again, everything else around that, the RACI charts, the SMART goals, be really clear about those things, and then send them out to every single person who attended that meeting right after the meeting is done. This is such an important task because unless you're absolutely clear about setting expectations, following up, creating responsibility and accountability, things are not going to get done. And you look back and look at each individual notes. Well, no, I have in my notes it's going to be next week. No, I thought that you were going to be responsible for that. Instead, if at the end of every meeting, at the end of any kind of point when you're making decisions and assigning responsibilities, that you make sure it's clearly communicated. Because here's the thing, expectations are not expectations unless they're written down and shared so that you create that accountability. Again, expectations are not real. It's not real until you write it down and it's shared, written down and shared. Because otherwise, you can't create that accountability. It's not clear who's responsible. And you can go to the next meeting and you're looking at each of the individual notes and there's no one source of truth. So the things I want to just, again, reiterate, the first thing is about modeling the way. The second is to set clear expectations. And I mean super clear, very specific expectations of when things are going to get done, who's going to go do it, that there are clear action items, etc. And then the third thing I would say is to create a safe space. I recently talked about psychological safety, and I can't begin to reiterate how important that is if you want to create a true sense of accountability. Because as I mentioned at the top, accountability is not just saying who's going to get something done. And again, 80% of people feel that accountability is punishment. If you want accountability to be a different sense, something that people are proud to own and come forward when things don't go right. It is so important that when things don't go right, that you have the safety, the sense of safety and support on your team to come forward and own the fact that it's not working for whatever reason. Either I dropped the ball or circumstances changed, it's not working. And to come forward so that the team who is accountable for, again, the end results can help fix that. And so this requires that we have a safe space to ask for, and to act on feedback. And when you see people doing this and doing it, when people see you doing this, they will see that it's safe for them to do it too as well. So it's really, really important to create that safety, that sense of support, that you're not going to get punished for coming forward, for taking responsibility for things not working out, for being accountable for the outcomes not being there, and that you're thanking people for having the courage and the fortitude and resilience to come forward and say, yeah, I'm owning this and I need help, but to make sure that that help is there. As you can imagine, if your culture does not support this right now, this is incredibly difficult to do, which is all the more important for you as a leader to come forward first, to come forward and admit things aren't working. Our team isn't there. We're responsible for these tasks. I wasn't able to do it. We weren't able to do it. Now we need to be accountable for it and to figure out how we're going to fix this. And to put it in that way, to say that because I own the fact that things didn't work out and I'm bringing it to the team to help make this work, creates the sense of we're in this together. And again, that starts from the top, because if that is not in there already in your culture, in the way that you do things, you're going to have to create that. All right, so that's what I have for today. What I wanted to share is again, this idea of responsibility, accountability, how to create it in your team. And the 3 ways to do that are to model the way yourself, start with yourself and create accountability and responsibility. Second, to set clear expectations. And the third, to create that safe space to ask for and to act on feedback. So a couple last comments here. Knox, you thought this is where I was going to go with accountability, responsibility, and RACI charts. Absolutely. I absolutely adore and use RACI charts all the time. And Jay has this great comment. I openly share with my direct reports the metrics I am held accountable to in the organization. So Jay, that's great. I love the fact that Jay, that we've talked about this past in the past areas too, how that openness about what we're trying to have to accomplish and being really open about also whether we're achieving it or not. Again, I say this again, employees, our team members just ask two things from our leaders, that we're honest and that we're fair. And if we are not honest and fair in the way that we approach the work that we do, fully transparent, creating accountability along the way, then they're not going to trust us. And trust is a fundamental thing that you want in your organization. Also, Thierry has this one question, one comment. Recent collaboration technologies help all of us see accountability and responsibility. It shows where we are lacking. This is a great point, Terry, that so many technologies allow us to do quick check-ins and stand-up meetings. You don't have to have a meeting to see what everyone is doing. I know some teams every day at the beginning of the day saying, this is what I'm accomplishing today. And at the end of the day, you just report back, this is what I accomplished. To create that sense of shared responsibility and create a sense of accountability that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to accomplish this. And the outcomes are going to be quite visible. Again, I think that accountability, responsibility is something that you build every single day in the actions that you take, in the interactions that you have, the sharing of the responsibilities and expectations, and the visibility of what's working and what's not. And when we have that transparency, when we have that ability to be accountable for each other, that builds trust. And in the end, that's what we're really trying to do, because you can only move at the speed of trust that is there. And if you're trying to create change and transformation, then you need a tremendous amount of trust in your team to know that you're going from one place to the other and you're going to do it together in a thoughtful, cohesive way, an aligned way. All right, so a couple last things here just to talk about what's coming up next. First of all, we're going to be talking next week about something completely different. I've been pondering this whole idea of how to have a perfect day. And so I'm actually doing a really short Ignite talk next Tuesday. And so this will be a bit of a warm up to that. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts about what does it mean to have a perfect day. And I think that the thoughts might be really different. But think about it in the meantime. What does a perfect day look like for you? And be ready to share that too as well. And I think in many ways, well, that'll be a very fun and different conversation, but I think one that hopefully is very meaningful to you as well. So in the meantime, I hope that you have a good chance to practice some of these things around creating accountability and responsibility in your organizations, again, starting with yourself. And then I will see you next week to talk about what it means to have a perfect day. All right. Thank you and have a great week. Bye-bye.